You are a toxic What's up, guys? Welcome to my channel. Today's video, I'm going to basically be going through the reasons that I do believe that pretty much nothing in Dead by Daylight is toxic. I know that sounds controversial, but hearing my reasons, hopefully you'll be able to somewhat agree with me, but I'm very interested to see the people, those that disagree with me versus those that maybe you can come up with an argument as to what I'm saying is wrong. Everything I express in this video is going to be my opinion and my opinion only. You don't have to agree. You're not obligated to agree, but hopefully we can have a little discussion about it and see what you guys think. So I want to put it out there that I am a Dead by Daylight killer main with over 1,600 hours of gameplay, just over on the killer side of things. I played Survivor for around about 200 to 300 hours when I first started the game with friends, as I'm sure most people did, and then from there I transitioned to killer, and I haven't really gone back since. So obviously, being that I am a killer main, I've had a lot of people come into my stream, and I've had a lot of people call me toxic, and I've had a lot of people throw around reasons of why I shouldn't play this way, why I should do this, why I should use this perk, why I should use this add-on, how I play is toxic, We've all heard it, we've all seen it. It happens consistently on this game, and even yourself as a Survivor player, if you are one, any of you guys that are Survivor mains out there, you've probably heard at the end of a game too, Survivor teammates calling you toxic or telling you how to play or how you should play. That's a completely horrible culture that I think is terrible, and it is quite rife in the community on Dead by Daylight, but it's a subject for another video. I wanted to focus on some things that people like to consistently and universally somewhat call toxic or deem to be toxic. These things we can go over and go into a little bit of detail with, and just for me to go over reasons of exactly why I think they're not toxic. The first thing I wanted to go over in this video is the act of teabagging. Now, most people do believe that teabagging is considered toxic, right? Teabagging, if you are not aware of what teabagging is somehow in this day and age, teabagging is the act of crouching up and down in a repetitive fashion. Teabagging in most instances is used against the killer, and it's used when a survivor drops a pallet on the killer and stuns him. They'll quickly mass teabag after the pallet stun. They will use a teabag if the killer is chasing them and they perhaps vault through a window and the killer whiffs on a hit. They will teabag spam there. There are some people, obviously, if you're carrying a survivor to a hook, they will body block the hook by teabagging and then take the hit and that kind of thing. So the teabag in those instances, those are the ones I'm going to focus on specifically. Now, as far as me saying nothing is toxic, of course I allude to that in the titular description of this video, but the point is what I'm going to go over with you guys is going to be the things that are most commonly referred to as toxic and the instances and scenarios where they're referred to as such. For this one, a survivor crouching up and down, teabagging at pallets or pallet stuns or window vaults and stuff towards the killer. These are primarily targeted towards the killer, and this is what I want to cover. This is where I'm in absolute disagreement that the survivor teabagging is in any way toxic. You have obviously new killers that will start playing the game. They're struggling. They're trying to figure out how to play the game. They're not the best. They're whiffing on hits, and they're facing maybe some more experienced survivors that are pretty good at getting away and understanding how to escape the killer. In this instance, most survivors, even if they're not the most confident survivors in the world, even if they're not the best survivors at chases in the world, almost all the time, you will see survivors pulling a pallet down and they will teabag. You will see survivors vaulting over a pallet. The killer misses a hit. They teabag. You will see a survivor vaulting a window. The killer misses a hit and hits the window frame. They will teabag. You will see a survivor flashlight and blind the killer, get to a loop, teabag to goat the killer into chasing them. There's a lot of different scenarios where survivors will do this, and it's not necessarily the fact that they're amazingly confident survivors. Some survivors just do it on an instinct and just spam the teabag when something goes their way towards the killer. It's not particularly they're trying to bully the killer. They're not trying to insult you. They're not trying to tell you you're shit. None of that stuff. Some people literally just do it out of instinct and habit, and it's just something that's kind of ingrained into the survivor player base now, and something that most of them instinctually do. So for me, teabagging in these instances, if you're trying to goat the killer into chasing you, if you're trying to entice the killer and get their attention and get them amped up and emotional to the point of where that killer continues to chase you, when perhaps it's not the smartest move to do so, whether because you're very experienced and very good at getting away, or if you're merely trying to take their time and attention away from the generators that are then getting completed by the rest of the team. To me, this just comes across as a viable strategy. A lot of things in this game that are attributed related to being toxic, to me, just come across as viable strategic methods that work to get you the victory. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's absolutely nothing wrong with teabagging the killer when you're in a chase with them, for whatever means you're trying to do it. If you're trying to get under their skin, if you're trying to antagonize them into making a mistake and making them whiff more shots because they're getting emotional, if you're trying to keep their attention on you, these are all strategic moves and absolutely an amazing reason or purpose to employ the teabagging strategy. There is nothing else in this game besides taunting that can really do the same thing in a quick of a manner. With the taunting, you'd have to turn and face the killer, you'd have to stand still for it. Teabagging is very easy and a very, very surefire, easy method to hopefully antagonize the killer, get them to slip up, make mistakes, and chase you for perhaps longer than they really should. So that brings me on to my next point, which is going to be body blocking. I'm sure you guys have seen it a lot, whether it's because you do it yourselves, whether it's because it happens to you when you play killer. Body blocking is 100% viable strategy in this game. Body collision is in the game for whatever reason the devs decided it is in the game. It's a thing that happens. You can accidentally block your survivor teammate, you can block the killer. As a killer, you could block survivors, and I'm going to get into that a little bit. But for now, survivors that body block hooks to stop teammates being hooked, great job. It's a viable strategy. It works. It's sound. Keep doing that. It makes sense. As a strategy, from a strategic standpoint and a tactic standpoint, you of course don't want to let your teammate get hooked or die. That will lose you the game. Keep body blocking killers. There is absolutely nothing wrong with it. As far as body blocking killers on loops, if you're noticing a killer chasing a certain survivor for a while and you think, hey, that survivor might just be struggling, might need a little bit of help here, if you want to stand in the door and block the killer from getting that survivor and finishing that chase, and you add those extra crucial seconds to that chase from doing so, and you take a hit for the team, absolutely viable strategy. Nothing wrong with that. I don't know in what universe people can call that toxic play. It's literally just a strategy that you're employing that the game allows you to employ with the whole body collision kind of deal. The same way, if you are body blocking as a survivor to make sure the killer can't go a certain route, so say if there's a one-way route for a building and he's chasing a survivor, you block that route off, they have to either hit you, which obviously lets you sprint off and lets the other survivor get away, or turn around and go somewhere else. Again, perfectly viable strategy. There is no way anyone can convince me body blocking is toxic. And I know most people are going to say, okay, when you're trying to carry a survivor to the hook and you're having a terrible game, survivors should go, oh, this killer's having a terrible game, let's let him get a hook, you know? But no, they sit in the hook and they crouch and then they block the hook and you hit them, and then someone else jumps in front and crouches and you hit them. That is called teamwork. I don't know how else to say that to anybody without being clearer than that. I have no idea. That is literally the epitome of teamwork, trying to stop one of their fellow teammates from being killed. In what crazy universe on a team game is teamwork to stop a loss toxic? It makes zero sense to me. Now, of course, we flip onto the killer side and you say, okay, but this sounds very survivor side at the moment. This sounds like you're sticking up for the survivors, and I'm with you. So I am a killer main. Of course, here's the caveat on body blocking. The caveat on body blocking is that survivors should never, ever get upset at a killer for also utilizing body blocking. Now, I've, in certain instances, had someone on a hook, whether or not it's because there's 2 generators left and I feel like I now need to make sure I secure this kill, we employ camping. And again, camping is a topic that I will get onto as a perfectly viable strategy. But in this case, if there is 4 survivors left and there's 3 or 2 generators left and I feel like I need to get someone dead right now, and I feel like if I can secure this kill on the hook, then that's going to turn the game around in my favor and I'm going to have a much better time for the rest of the game. Sometimes I can employ body blocking. Body blocking isn't always effective for a killer. It can be used in certain instances where there is a path to a hook that is blocked off by maybe a doorway, a tight space, something along those lines. And even as a killer, you can block certain alleyways or pathways to the hook in order to put your back to it and then see if any survivors are coming from the left or right peripheral, and you can can make sure no survivor can get through a passageway behind you to a hook. If survivors start complaining at that, then it is the most hypocritical thing I've ever seen in my entire life. So body blocking as a survivor is an entirely viable strategy. It is a tactic that makes sense when you employ it, and it can work in so many different situations. It's also the same for killer. So if survivors are going to get angry at me for body blocking as a killer, it comes across very hypocritical and you just look stupid. So as a killer, if you're incorporating body blocking into your gameplay, sometimes that can actually be, to stop people rescuing off a hook. Sometimes it can actually be to block people in a corner. So sometimes if I find a survivor in a corner and say the end game collapse is ticking down, and I found them in a corner and I've trapped them there, I'll body block. I have no reason or obligation to hit that survivor and give them a free passageway and a free sprint to the exit gate. I have no reason to do that. And for people to say that is toxic, it makes completely zero sense, because they're the same people that were body blocked to take hits, they were body blocked to block routes, they were body blocked to save hooks. These are all massively game-altering things for the killer that can literally change a win to a loss and vice versa. So for me to body block as a killer, sometimes if I body block somebody when the end game collapse is ticking down and I've killed one or two others, and this guy I found him in a corner or trapped him in a corner and he can't move, I'll body block and let the end game collapse go down and get my kill. If I'm not entirely confident that once I hit that person, I can't stop them from getting to the exit game because game mechanics might not allow for it and we might be near a really strong loop, yada yada yada, I'm going to keep that guy blocked, I'll let him die to the entity, and I'll get my kill. People will call that toxic. You'll see it a lot. And on the description of it, on the face of it, you can see why they might. But when you preface it with what I've talked to you about with the survivor body blocking being a completely fine and legit strategy, this should be not looked down upon. This should be not shamed. This should not be called or considered toxic in any way. It's a viable strategy. The body collision is in the game for a reason, and this can work very well in certain instances for the killers to use and take advantage of. We've covered this already alongside teabagging, but I wanted to talk to you guys about taunting. Don't have too much to say on the matter other than what I pretty much said about teabagging. If you're a killer and you're getting affected emotionally by a survivor taunting you, you're playing the game wrong. You're employing bad strategy. You're letting it go to your head, and you're throwing the game for the exact reasons that survivors want you to throw the game. They want you to get antagonized by it. They want you to get emotional over the taunting, and they want you to chase them, hard focus them, and lose time on generators, and also possibly whiff shots because you're getting aggressive and you're not thinking properly, and you're not level, you're not calm, you're not playing smart. Taunting works beautifully for that in some instances. I've had instances where I'm playing the game and I'll be the killer and someone will taunt me and I will voluntarily chase them, knowing in my head, I know I'm throwing the entire game. I know I'm going to lose. I know it's a stupid thing to do. I go for him and I throw the game. And at the end of the game, I'll say, your tactic worked. I threw the game. You wanted me to throw the game. So there are a lot of instances where taunting can work, and if you employ the strategy perfectly and the killer wastes time, gets emotional, gets aggressive, gets silly, gets stupid, gets reckless, whatever other verbiage you want to use for those situations, if you're using taunting to cause those situations to happen, you've done a great job and you employed that strategy very, very well. The taunts are in the game for a reason. Now, granted, they were probably in the game to communicate with other survivors because there is no proximity voice chat. So they're in the game to tell other survivors to come here or look over there or go over there. That's what they're in the game for. Obviously, they're not used that way. And a lot of times they are used to antagonize the killer, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Use what you can to your advantage. And if it works, fantastic. There is nothing toxic about using the taunts against the killer in an attempt to mind game them and get them to play emotionally. Flashlight clicking, flashlight spamming, maybe macroing it to your scroll wheel so you can spam the hell out of it. I get it. People think it's toxic, and this is the exact same reason people think taunting and teabagging is toxic. They're not toxic, they're just methods to antagonize the killer, hopefully, and make them play silly. If you're chasing and hard focusing a survivor and somebody is running around behind you or nearby and they are flashlight clicking, flashlight spamming, their tactic at that point, their job is to try and get your attention, to try and make you focus on them, and ideally they're trying to say, look, chase me, stop chasing chasing that guy, please. I don't want you to kill my friend. And that is completely okay. Of course he doesn't want you to kill his friend. That would be bad for him. That would be bad for their team. That might turn into a loss. Either way, they want to protect their friend. They want to try and get the attention. They want to make you angry, and they want you to chase them instead because they don't believe they want their friend to die. They want to get you to chase them instead because they don't want their friend to die. That is perfectly acceptable. To me, there is nothing toxic about clicking your flashlight. Click away. It's not a mechanic they're abusing. They're not changing the outcome of the game based on some sort of glitch or exploit or whatever. It's nowhere near toxic. It's a perfectly viable strategy to try and catch the killer's attention, antagonize them, and make them chase you, which is what we've covered in the past 2 subjects of taunting and teabagging. These are completely viable strategies and tactics that you can 100% employ and should 100% employ without the worry of being judged by everyone else. This brings me swiftly on to camping and tunneling. My God. If I had a penny, let's say £1, for every single time I've heard the words camping and tunneling on this game, I would be so rich. It's ridiculous. The main problem with the words camping and tunneling is it is lingo that, even like toxic, is thrown around so much in this community and the player base as a whole as excuses for the reasons of why they died, as opposed to just actually learning from their gameplay and getting better. It is something that's consistently leaned upon as a reason, as an excuse, and a scapegoat for the reason somebody died, rather than just trying to look at every other factor in the game as to why they might have died. Quick story time. I introduced a friend to this game one time back when I used to be a Survivor player, and I got him to play along with us and a couple of other friends, and we were playing Survivor, and he hadn't played the game pretty much at all. In these games, I kid you not, my friend got found on a generator by the killer, who then subsequently hit my friend, and my friend ran off and was now in a chase. What you and I would call a chase, right? You've engaged in a chase. It's happening. Here we go. The killer has injured you. They're gonna want you dead, right? They're gonna want you down. They're gonna commit to this chase. My friend, who at this point probably had about an hour in the game, literally complained to me that the killer was tunneling him. And now I know that's jovial and we can all scoff at that and say, well, that's silly, he's just committing to a chase. But the problem is, he'd heard this lingo from watching gameplay or hearing some other people play the game or myself play the game. He'd heard this word and no real knowledge of exactly what the word meant. He just threw it out there into the open, and it was kind of an awkward moment in that Discord chat when he said, this killer is tunneling me. And I was trying to piece it together in my head. Did he really just say that? And he did. That is no word of a lie. That is a true story that happened. And it really highlighted to me exactly how much these words are spread around like wildfire in the community, and people just throw them out there without even a regards as to what they could have done differently. If there was reasons that they did something wrong and why they died, it's immediately camping, tunneling. I don't give a shit. Nothing else matters. You're the problem. And it's always the way whenever you play Survivors. Survivors will always call out camping and tunneling. Let me put this straight. Camping and tunneling are very viable strategies in this game. They are 100% viable strategies, and like every other strategy, tactic, or gameplay style, they have their own counters. Decisive strike is in the game. Granted, with the most recent patch, people got put off the perk a lot, but it is still very, very viable. And right now, these days, it kind of does the job it was supposed to do. If you've just been rescued off a hook, do not go and try and repair a generator while injured. Do not get healed unless you're in a safe space. That is just basic survival. That is basic survival. And I don't want to say, well, if this was in the real world, but I'm going to say it. If this was in the real world and you were on the run from a killer and you were really injured and really at risk, and you were exposed, you wouldn't then go and start doing something really loud and obnoxious. You wouldn't then start like trying to mend your wounds in the proximity of the killer in a very obviously loud, moaning in pain manner. You wouldn't do that. It doesn't make sense. From a survivability standpoint, it doesn't make sense. So Decisive Strike is in the game to do exactly what it's supposed to do. It's to counter tunneling. Tunneling tunneling is when you get unhooked and somebody comes immediately barreling after you. Tunneling is not if you get unhooked and you go towards a generator and you start working on it, that killer comes back for the noise notification that plays very loudly in the game when you get unhooked, by the way, and you're in the general proximity working on a generator, moaning and tinkering noises going on. That is not tunneling. If the killer comes to the gen and attacks you, you're not supposed to stand there and go, well, don't attack me, I've just come off the hook. That doesn't, it just makes no sense whatsoever. And same if you're healing. If you get unhooked and you move this much away from the noise notification and you start healing and the killer comes back and you go, oh, well, you need to chase the healthy guy there that was trying to heal me, not me. I've just come off the hook. No. That is not viable strategy. It doesn't make sense. It is stupid. It is just absolutely insane to think that the killer should then turn their attention away from you, the injured, vulnerable survivor, and go for the healthy one, which is going to cost him way more time while you go off and get healed somewhere else. And let's not even talk about the fact that Boone's circle of healing totems and stuff and all that kind of stuff that adds to it now being way more of just not a viable option to chase the healthy person when there's an unhealthy person right there in front of you. Now, you might have just seen that I went back and said, well, that isn't tunneling. I've just explained situations where that isn't tunneling, right? And you're going, well, no. Now, hang on a second, because you said tunneling in its own right isn't toxic. And let me explain what I mean by that. Tunneling someone straight off a hook is a completely viable and solid strategy that any killer can employ. The counter, of course, is borrowed time. The counter, of course, after borrowed time has maybe been procced, is a body block. And the counter, of course, to the next steps of that is being good at chases. A lot of survivors will just lean on the crutch of, oh, I got tunneled, instead of being good at chases and getting better at chases and becoming good at losing the killer, whether it's using stealth builds or escape builds that are perfectly viable with certain perks to get away from the killer, lead them off the trail, and be stealthy. There's a lot of builds that do that. If you are confident enough to use them, cool. If you are not using those builds and you get unhooked, and if a killer has decided at this point in the match they don't feel like they're very good at catching the other survivors, if they're like, okay, I've had some difficulty catching the other survivors, here's one I caught earlier and I can definitely catch him again, I feel like, you know what, I'm gonna chase him. If you are a deranged, lunatic, psychopath killer and there are four human beings that are trying to get away from you and escape and defeat you to an extent, and you have one that you know you are able to catch and that you know you can catch again, if you are in any scenario where you find that you're up against a strong team and you find a weak link in that team, of course it makes strategic sense to go after the weakest link, right? And that person has been identified as the weakest link, and there are countless times on stream where I've employed the tunneling strategy on somebody and it has bitten me in the ass so hard. So the reason it sometimes bites me in the ass is what? It's survivors that are actually good at chases that just slipped up. They just slipped up and they made me believe that they were perhaps worse at the game than they actually are. And for that, I pay the price. So I decide, okay, well, I'm just going to tunnel because we've got 3 gens left. I need to get somebody dead. He's just been unhooked and I've caught him already. So I'll just go for that guy. I'll get the kill. As a killer, it is a really smart strategy to get somebody dead so you're against less players. That puts the game in a much more winnable situation for the killer with only 3 people left instead of 4. It makes absolute strategic sense to tunnel a player with or without camping, essentially. And if this is happening as a survivor team, you need to register when this is happening and how you can counter this. So obviously, number 1 counter is borrowed time. Number 2 counter is body block. Number 3 counter is just having people on your team that are good at chases. And I know if you're playing with random people, you can't guarantee that. It's not my fault as a killer. It should never be the killer's fault how you decide to play the game, who you decide to play the game with. It should never be the killer's fault if that person isn't very good at chases. It's never a toxic thing to go after a weak link in the team to try and turn the game around to be in a much more viable place for you to win. And we touched on it a little bit there. Obviously, camping is something you can employ immediately alongside tunneling to secure a kill, and I've gone over the reasons why you would need to secure a kill, and I cannot count the amount of times where I've not been doing too great in a game. I might have hooked 1 or 2 people, but there's 3 or 2 gens left and I go, okay, look, I need to get myself a kill here to make this game winnable. And the amount of times I will put that person on a hook. Do you know what camping and tunneling does to people at high level? Do you know what it does to people? It does the same thing that taunting, flashlighting, and teabagging does to the killer. Camping and tunneling is the killer's version of that, and that sounds a bit wild, but it really is. There's a lot of high-level survivor players when, say, if you've got 1 or 2 hooks, or 3 hooks, or 4 hooks, whatever, maybe 1 each, whatever you've done, if you decide at 2 or 3 generators to then proceed to employ the camping and tunneling strategy, essentially, as a tactic, it sets off the emotions of so many high-level survivors that they throw logic to the wind, they get emotional, they get angry that this is taking place, and they feel insulted as players that this person on a hook is relying on their skill level to get them off and save the day, and they feel very, very powerless. And it gets them emotional, and it gets them frantic, and they make so many mistakes. And the amount of games where I've definitely been on the verge of losing, I will pull off the camping and tunneling strategy, and I will get one dead, and the other survivors will also take a lot of damage or get hooked themselves, throw caution to the wind. They will orchestrate terrible saves, like terribly coordinated saves. There will sometimes just be 2 or 3 of them running in proximity to the hook, and I will keep fake chasing on them, and they will keep running in circles. In my head then, especially if I have a 3 or 4 gen, and I can see a couple of gens, or I could proxy here that no one's working on those gens, and I see 2 other players running in circles, not proceeding to work on generators or get the game won, I'm in such a comfortable place as a killer. I have no reason to leave that hook. I have no reason to chase a survivor. They're not giving me a reason to care about their lives still going because they're not working on progressing the generators. I don't see any threat in what they're doing. They're just running around in circles, letting the guy die next to me and not progressing the win for their team. So I have no reason to move from the hook. People need to understand this. People need to accept that this is a game plan, this is a strategy, and you need to stop getting reckless and careless and emotional when a killer employs this strategy. All it should be is a killer getting desperate, panicking, employing the camping strategy out of absolute desperation from losing the game, or maybe it's a middle of the stage game, maybe no one's fully winning or losing yet, but it should be a losing strategy for the killer, and a lot of high-level survivors team know how to make this happen. They know how to make it a losing strategy. They will just get generators done, and then they will coordinate a save where maybe someone body blocks, someone fakes the unhook, someone gets the attention, someone blocks the killer. That kind of there's a lot of different strategies you can employ to save someone off a camping killer's hook. And then there's an argument, of course, of, oh, we're playing with randoms, though. It's toxic to do that to us when we're just playing as randoms and we can't communicate. It's not the killer's fault. It's not the killer's fault there's no communication strategy in the game. It's not the killer's fault there's no quick message system or ping system. It's not the killer's fault there's no voice chat in game. There's nothing toxic about employing a camping or tunneling strategy if you feel like it will get you a victory. And against high-level teams, it mostly doesn't, but at the same time, it can throw a lot of high-level teams for a loop, get them emotional, and sometimes get you a 2 or 3 kill game in a game that would have been just a 1 kill if they'd have got the generators done, exit gates powered, and left the game. It's a 1 kill game. It's not a very viable strategy sometimes for the killer, and vice versa for the survivors if they let it be so. On the conversation of camping, there are unfortunately some killers that are just better at this. Now, recently I've been playing a game called Identity V. That game is pretty much a game that encourages camping for certain killers, discourages it for certain killers because they're not great at that strategy, essentially. And if you look at somebody like Bubba, who is obviously, his main attack is AoE reliant. It's reliant on having more than one survivor in front of him at any one time. The perfect place for that, the perfect bait for that, is a hook and is camping and or tunneling. So if you look at killers like Bubba, you look at killers like Doctor and Pyramid Head, who aren't amazingly mobile, they aren't amazing at gen pressure, at map control. Their main strengths, and even Trapper to an extent, their main strengths is 3 or 4 gens in a small cluster, get a hook near those gens, monitor those gens and that hook. It's hook control, it's hook guarding, it's completely viable. In the game I referred to earlier, Identity V, some killers have a strength of chair guarding, which is their version of hooks. Some people are better at that. That is shown on a chart that is nice and obvious for your eyes to see. That's not the way on Bubba. Now, if I said to you, oh, how do you feel about Bubba going around the entire map and patrolling all of the generators at the same time and also going for single hooks each time? It's dumb. It makes no sense. His power is very, very powerful when the survivor's nearby in a cluster and he can use that AoE hit. And that usually happens when you draw survivors over to a certain place. How do you draw survivors over to a certain place in Dead by Daylight? The only instance is a hook or 3-gen where they need to get a generator done, right? That's your chance right there. So again, camping and tunneling are viable strategies. Some killers have that as a strength. Some have it as a weakness. Some killers, it doesn't make sense to employ this strategy and it doesn't work so well. Some it does, and the game developers have designed the killers in that specific way. It's unfortunate, but it's not toxic. So those are just some of the reasons why I think camping and tunneling is a viable strategy and not toxic at all in Dead by Daylight. Of course, there's going to be a lot of discussion on the matter and you guys are going to agree or disagree with me. That is fine. It is in no way toxic to employ a strategy. As a killer, when you hook a survivor, naturally, at least one of the other 3 survivors are going to be coming over there instead of doing generators to save that teammate. As a killer, using this as bait to draw another survivor in and cause chaos is a perfectly viable strategy and is in no way toxic. Now we move on to the spicy subject of slugging. I don't want to spend too much time on this because I feel like a lot of it is really obvious and I shouldn't have to say it, but I'm going to say some things. Obviously, Nurse and Bubba, Oni to an extent. There are some killers that obviously much stronger by employing a slugging tactic. People don't like slugging because sometimes they don't bring perks that counter it, right? There are perks that counter slugging. There are perks for that, right? There are perks that make you crawl faster. There are perks that make you recover faster. There are perks that make you get up by yourself and then also take an extra hit afterwards. There's all kinds of stuff like that. There's stuff in this game to counter every specific type of strategy. So if you look at Oni, you look at Nurse, you look at killers like that do benefit from slugging. Again, this is the same as the thing I talked about earlier with Bubba and camping. It's just a viable strategy. It's in that killer's arsenal. It's entirely easier to slug with Nurse or Oni, people like that, than it is with other killers. So that's a strength of theirs, right? And same with twins to an extent. If you play into a killer's strength, survivors hate it. Why do they hate it? Because it's hard to stop. It's hard to counter. How dare you play to that killer's strength and slug people? How dare you play to Bubba's strength and camp a hook? How dare you? They don't like it because it's powerful and it's hard to deal with. It's really stupid. It's the exact same way of a killer saying, how dare you use decisive strike? That's so overused. It's because it's strong and it's because it stops a specific strategy that killer might want to employ at some point. It's so nonsensical to call these things toxic. They're in the game and they are strategies that are in the game and available to do in game by developer choice. It's insane to call these things toxic and it blows my mind. So as far as slugging goes, and we're talking about slugging here to go off and down somebody else, it is 100% a viable strategy. It's a viable tactic to slug. It makes sense on a certain amount of killers, but even on other killers, if you do want to secure a 4 kill, if you do want to secure a 3 kill, whatever it may be, if somebody's running around a hook and you've downed somebody and you see a survivor nearby, you hear a survivor nearby, you see scratch marks nearby and you think, well, they're just going to unhook them when I hook this guy and walk away, I'm going to go for him. Slugging is completely acceptable. Please do not feel worried. Do not feel scared to slug or use this strategy because survivors might insult you in the post-game chat. Just stop. Just stop worrying about what people think about it. It's a viable strategy. Slugging is in no way toxic. I'm aware that there are some scenarios where slugging, camping, that kind of stuff can be toxic in certain scenarios and even teabagging to an extent. And I explained a bit about teabagging at the start of the video with blocking survivors from vaulting and stuff purely out of spite, and then teabagging to laugh at the fact that you just screwed their game over, that kind of thing. There are obviously instances where these strategies and tactics and tools that are available to you in-game to use can be used in a toxic manner. It's not to say they are toxic strategies in the right instances, and the instances that I've covered unfortunately are pretty much widely deemed toxic. Like when people mention teabagging and camping, and when people mention tunneling, and when people mention slugging, they're not actually just referring to the manners where this stuff is used in a toxic way. They're referring to it as a whole, which is very unfortunate, and we need to establish a clear line between these things. Teabagging and taunting while blocking a survivor from getting through and you're on the same team, that is toxic. That's toxic behavior. It's just behaving in a toxic way. I'm fine with that descriptive. Camping in a way that if you start a game, to me, and you put somebody on a hook, the first person you hook, if you put somebody on that hook and you immediately face camp them, I struggle to call that toxic. I still call it a strategy. So that person is trying to engage in camping immediately to hopefully get survivors to play reckless, forget about generators at the start of the game, at the very start of the game. If you get caught out by somebody camping and you don't just immediately go and do 3 generators, let that person go to second stage, and after 3 generators are done, orchestrate a save together and try a Hail Mary to get that person off. The worst thing that happens is you don't get them off, a couple of you get injured, maybe downed, but you've got only 2 gens left to do between 3 of you, and that is a good position to be in a game if you're confident enough at your own chases. The best thing that can happen for the killer is you go over there, you stop touching the generators, and you focus the camping because it's annoyed you and emotionally affected you. In the instance that killers do this, where it's quite rare, I think, for a killer to put somebody on a hook straight away in camp. They're either very inexperienced killers who don't really know any other way of playing because they're scared to go and do chases. So they go, oh great, I've got somebody, I'm going to get this kill. Fantastic, I'm going to guard it. They're usually not the best players, so sometimes you can pull off a rescue. Sometimes it is viable to go for that early rescue and gauge if they're actually a good player or not, if they're actually very good at the camping strategy or not. Other instances, it's usually just somebody that's out there to piss you off. It's somebody that's out there to get at you. It's somebody that's trying to purposely annoy you and employ the camping strategy early so that you get reckless and you throw the entire game out of emotion. That's the end of this video, guys. Sorry it was such a long video, but I do get very rambly and very emotional in certain instances on certain subjects, as you could probably tell. I'd be very interested to know if you guys agree or disagree with certain points in this video. Let's start a conversation about it. Be polite about it, because I know there's a lot of aggressiveness out there in the community, but thank you so much for sticking with me through this one, and hopefully I'll see you again next time.